the economy up here as well, because this was an important product, and it was being shipped to global markets. But the very first cannery wouldn't have been over here because they wouldn't have been fishing for Pacific salmon. The very first cannery would have been in New York, and that would have been in 1816. So it would have taken almost 50 years for it to come over here on the Pacific side. Now, it was and it had a tendency of being overfished at that time. And again, the European market is the ones that really looked for canned salmon. So as we go into the cannery now, you'll feel, we are as well, because, well, I can't pinpoint the top here because it is quite high. And this is rock, of course, and trees.
Yeah.
But above are several lakes. And they would have been dammed in the early, I think, 30s and 40s in order to prevent mudslides. Because we would have suffered a mudslide here in the early 1900s. And they would have taken many lives over at Inverness. Here, they would have taken out most of our First Nations homes, and it would have missed the main canning building by a couple of feet. But luckily for us at this cannery, by the time this occurred, most people were already at their workplace. So the structure we were just in, the net loft for First Nations, that was actually barged over here from another cannery.
Whole?
Yes.
So that whole building would float?
You bet. They would have put that on a barge, and they would have brought it here in pieces.
Oh, pieces.
They would have
Okay,
had to put it back up, but they would have barged it over. Again, these pilings, of course, they're very, very old. Some of our restoration work really was to replace a lot of that and work on the dock area, but these would have been all hand dug in the mud. They refer to that as the mud. And they would have hand dug these. And the originals, the very first ones that are in place, when we restored, we would have added pilings to the original. And the original in the mud still have bark on the trees. They don't deteriorate when they're preserved in the mud. So we would have added to that to replace the ones that we see that are affected by the tide that comes in and out. So here's a little mock-up of the cannery itself. And you'll see on the dock is where those bluestone tanks are. And that's where they would have soaked those nets, the cotton and linen ones, to relieve it of all of the algae. And a little train should come by.
Yeah, there it is.
Is it coming?
Yeah, it's there.
There you go. It's a cute little representation of it, but so right now, this is what we call the salt shed. And of course, we would have stored salt here at one point. We would have stored product here. We would have stored some tins. But right now, it's a little bit of an homage to Port Essington, and we have, adjusted these storefronts to just have a look to it. But this would have been the latest addition to the cannery itself. Now, of course, trade didn't come here for quite some time, but it is an important component of what we see. This is what maybe.
Oh, wow.
What we made with these, when we left the office, and I usually have a loonie with me. Do you have a?
I have a loonie, yeah.
Do you? Perfect. We'll get these trains moving. See the train attendant. The train attendant's never really here, but.
Should.
I didn't either, but good, you do. Very good. Perfect.
Wait a second. Okay, whatever.
There you go. And maybe some will start moving. Several actually will start moving. Pretty impressive, huh?
Yeah.
So a fellow by the name of Norman Kinsler willed these to us. So we became the proud owners of this expansive set. It would have taken us almost a year and a half to install it here with all of these tracks. And we do have a volunteer that comes in and gets to it, and they've recently changed some of the controllers, and they bring it up to speed now and again. So it's really pretty impressive. So we'll ask folks too.
Wait, so this is a model of trains where?
This is just trains.
Oh, just trains general, yeah. Because this wasn't here to Cannery.
No, not at all. This is why this particular shed, this salt shed, has really been used as, putting various items that we do have around the cannery itself. And this was a good spot for us to install it. And of course,
okay.
the train tracks are right there. This is a very heavily used rail here. Canada's second largest port is in Prince Rupert. The
Okay.
largest port in Canada is
Vancouver, yeah.
and second largest is right up here in Prince Rupert. So this train line right there is very, very, very used. Now, if you drove here, which you said you did, you would have come along the Skeena. That last leg of your trip to come in here would have been along the Skeena. You'll see the rail goes right along that.
Yeah, back and forth.
Back and forth.
Across the tracks.
So often absolutely they think has priority over on the rail, whether it's passengers or freight. It's freight, of course, today, but not that long ago would have been passengers. And this would have been heavily used here by the folks here too. They would have hopped on those trains to go to either another cannery, or they could even walk the train. They would walk the rails. And again, would have been passengers more than anything else coming through here.
Yep.
So here's the main cannery itself. So this is what would have been built in 1889. And it'll feel a little cooler as we enter.
You still smell the salmon.
Do you? There is a certain odor that still lingers here, for sure. So architectural designs for canneries are either L-shaped or T-shaped. So from these windows to these windows, this is the original cannery that would have been built in 1889. Now the fishing, of course, quite rudimentary to start, and this is how we would have done this for many decades to come. They would have fished in these gill netters. So these are the boats that they would have used to go fishing. There would have been a sail here. 2 oars, they would have used essentially a rowboat, but the sail would have powered them somewhat to go be put in place. And they would have been on the Skeena for 6 days at a time. They would have stayed on the Skeena. So a crew of 2 men, either First Nations or Japanese, but mostly here would have been First Nations. And they would have had another boat that would have come back and forth to bring them food and water, but more importantly, to take their catch.
Yeah.
So in the very early days, we would have Inverness, which is a cannery over there. There's us over here. There's Cassiar over here. Blah, 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 go on and on. They would have detonated a cannon, and that cannon would have signified it's time to go to fish. And then all of them would have gone to the Skeena to fish for 6 days only, and they would have not fished for that 7th day. And really what they were looking to do is that we're catching this fish before they've spawned, right? So by not fishing at all, you're at least letting them get to the destination and spawn, so you'll have supplies for following fishing years. So there are 2 stories about the Skeena River, and one of the stories is that you can walk across it and never get your feet wet because you're walking on the backs of salmon. There's so many going up. And another story is that you can walk across it, never get your feet wet, but really because you would have been going from boat to boat to boat. So this is the original canning line. It's the manual line. We would have had 2 lines here operating. And at these tables, we would have had Chinese butchers. Now, the butchers that would have been here, they were quite skilled, and they were also called the singing knives because of the motion and noise that their knives would have made. But when they were doing this, when they were, again, fish are pretty well at full maturation here, so 12, 14 pounds, this is what we're looking at. And they would have just gone ahead and butchered the fish by removing head, tail, fins. They would have eviscerated, and everything would have been thrown back to that water again, right? The second station here, and these fellows were very gifted, and they could do, I believe, 4 to 5 per minute. So that was very fast butchering. Over here, we would have had First Nations women would have worked here, particularly young women. Often they would stand at these sliming bins, because now we're sliming the fish. They'd stand here sometimes with their babies on their backs. They could stand here for 16, 17-hour days quite easily. Again, the fish would have come in, they would have sorted it by species, and, you know, for as long as there was fish to butcher, they would still be here to slime them because time was of the essence.
What's sliming?
Slime would have been essentially now the fish has been butchered and no head, no tail, and no
insides,
right? So, I mean, there's scale on salmon, not heavy scale, but there is. So they would have them soaking in the water here, and they would clean them. Basically, sliming is cleaning the exterior and the interior. They would have had water in here, and they would have changed it every 3 hours, and they would have stood with their hands in this water for all of this time. And because it was so cold, because it really is normally, I mean, water is instantly cold here, they would have stood in hot water bins just to keep warm.
Wow.
And often they would have had younger kids. You know, when I say the younger kids could have worked here too, they would have come and they would have fed them while they were working. This was a grueling work. So the second, and now we still need to cut the fish. So it's been butchered, it's been slimed, but now we need to cut them to size to be able to fit inside those tins.
Mhm.
Now when we think of tins of salmon, we often think about the smaller ones, but the Europeans probably would have had the larger ones, the 1-pounders. When we go to the other side, to the mechanical line, you'll see we have all these tins that are really decayed. Those were the original ones that would have been used, or the taller ones. So they would have spaced these blades in conjunction with the size of the tin that they were doing, and they would have released this lever here, and First Nations men would have actually wound this up. This would have gone up, and the fish would have been cut. Once they were in chunks, Chinese workers would have been moving these crates about, and they would have brought them here with product, now it's all cut, to the fillers. The fillers would have been women again, First Nations women, and they would fill with their hands, of course.
So these are original cans?
They are original cans. They would have taken these, and you'll see some really decayed one over there. They would have taken the fish, and they would have filled them, and a good filler could do 72 of these a minute.
So are these ones made with tin and sealed with lead?
They would have had lead, and the lead, they're not filled with lead. The lead
I said
would
sealed,
have been the
sealed,
mechanism
yeah.
to seal them, exactly. So they would have put a lid on it here, and this is where they would have sealed it. So yes, indeed, lead would have been used to seal it. So this would have, again, we would have had some workers on the other side of this wheel. They would have turned this about. Of course, this should be above the chain, and it would have the effect of turning the tins along. And in here, you would have had a trough of molten lead again. So they're sealed. Now they're sealed. But yes, they're quite aware that lead is poisonous. Oh, but lead is poisonous once it oxidizes. So they would have taken these tins that have been sealed up now with the lead. They would have sat them in here for a warm bath for about 30 minutes. And that would have made the can swell somewhat, looking to have the air come out. And another, they would have had 2 of these in place. A man would have been in this position. We've altered the tool because it's too sharp to leave out. The cannery is open for everyone to come in. So a man would have been here, and they would have made a final punch in the tin. This would have have the air come out, and then a final dab of lead. Now, it's sealed, but it's not cooked. We haven't actually canned yet.
Yeah.
We put it inside, but we haven't.
Still raw.
You bet, still raw. So, you can appreciate that the time here, they've been on the skeena, they fished it, they sorted it, they brought it in, we need to get this going. And this is why they would stay here for long, long, long hours until there was no more fish to butcher. Now we cook them. Steam engines existed. Steam did exist, of course, and they would have put them in here. These are called retorts for 90 minutes at 520 or 540, I believe it was Fahrenheit, and they would have cooked them. Once they were cooked, all the tins would have come out. They would have cooled them for an entire day, and then they would have labeled and shipped. All of the equipment we see on this side, I don't tour, nor do I discuss too much, but those would have been the tools and some of the machinery that they would have used to label and to crate and to cart and to ship. Originally, again, our market is a European market. Now, if we're looking at the globe and we're going to Europe and we're over here in the Pacific, we have a heck of a long way to go by boat. They would have gone by boat to Vancouver, then be put on cargo ships. But in those days, there were no shortcuts in the continents. There was no Panama Canal. So we wouldn't have put the labels on at that point in time, because by the time they had that long voyage, the labels would have decayed. That's right, from the salt air. But once there were shortcuts and rail too, then we were able to save a little bit of time, and then we would have done that. So that's why if you come back in the cannery, and it is open, of course, you have a whole host of labels there that people do, and some of them you may recognize too. Now this fleet would have, of course, changed, would have gone a little wider, a little larger, and they would have actually had stoves right on board. So because they were gone for 6 days, but they would have had little stoves on board to eat.
Yeah.
And packer boats, that was the very first motorized boat that with a motored engine for a boat, would have pulled all of these boats, these steel netters, and they would have positioned them to go do their fishing. So it's almost like they would have been pulling a train of them over to this canal. So now that the sun is really coming out, this will be kind of a bonus here. So this was the biggest effort in restoration, and that was to restore the dock. We didn't enhance the dock, we didn't make it large. This was the size of the working dock. So we were right over there in the net loft.
Yeah.
And the net loft, again, all of the entrances and exits from all of these buildings, insofar as, working buildings, of course, everything is geared to the water, because this is the highway, basically. Nothing over there. This is where the action would have been. We have a boat lift right here. Still works. Again, the idea is that the tide comes up, the boat lift goes down, the boats come up. These are all wood boats, and the fleet would have been wood for many years to come. And the experienced and very gifted boat makers and tenders would have been our Japanese here. They would have, and there would have been also over the years, there was even a boat making shop right in Port Edward where Japanese would have lived in as well, segregately too, but they would have lived there for many years. So this area is 40,000 square feet. We do lots of events here. We have private events. We have public events. Just last weekend, and we're still taking it apart now, we would have had a stage set up here. We had our Intertidal Music Festival, and this was the beer garden. That's why we have it still closed in. We're about to, all that will go away very soon. And we do, people, get married here, and never do they actually set up outside, because we can never really bank on the weather, but they do use part of the Cannery for that. So the tide is out still, but when it comes back up, it moves at a pretty good clip. So this is considered the northern arm of the Skeena River. And boy, I just can't catch a break with those clouds today. It pinpoints some areas. So here's the Inverness Passage here.
Yeah.
So it goes along here. What we see there are some mountains there. Not too long ago there was snow on the peaks. And that's actually on an island. And beyond that, that's where the Skeena is.
Yeah.
So this is where they would have gone. So we have the Skeena, which is when you drove along here, you would have driven along the Skeena. So the Pacific is over here.
I just get a panoramic picture.
Absolutely. It's just odd with these cloud formations now, but it changes absolutely by the minute here. It really does. This water can move fast, and then other times it can look like a mirror.
Yeah, I know. I did